Every single organization today, whether it's a tiny startup or a massive corporation, is basically navigating a minefield of potential threats. So, how do you find an enemy you can't even see? Well, that's where organizational risk assessment comes into play. It's all about turning those abstract fears into real, concrete, actionable plans. All right, let's dive right in. So, our guide for this entire explainer is the fantastic work of Professor Simon Mina Karume. His material on information systems really lays the groundwork for everything we're about to cover. He's the one who sets the stage for, how we can systematically manage all those uncertainties that modern businesses are up against.
And that really brings us to the central question, doesn't it? I mean, with threats all over the place, from super sophisticated hackers to simple human error or even natural disasters, how on earth do businesses actually see these invisible dangers and steer clear of them? Well, the answer isn't magic. It's actually a very structured process.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we first have to dissect the whole idea of risk. It's not just this one big, scary thing. Nope. It's actually an interaction between a few key components. So let's break them down one by one. First up, it all starts with an asset. And really, an asset is just something of value to the organization. Think about it. It could be your customer database, your secret sauce software, the servers that everything runs on, or even the incredible expertise of your people. It's the stuff you're trying to protect. All right, next we have the threat. This is the potential danger, right? The thing that could actually cause harm to your asset. So a hacker, that's a threat. A piece of malware, definitely a threat. But you know what? So is a flood or a simple power outage. It's basically the what could go wrong part of the equation. So how does a threat actually get to an asset? Well, it gets in through a vulnerability. This is the weakness, the gap in your armor, the unlocked door. It could be a piece of software you forgot to update, a firewall that isn't set up quite right, or, and we've all seen this, something as simple as an employee using password 123 to protect super sensitive data. Okay, so here's where it all clicks together. The risk absolutely skyrockets when a major threat lines up perfectly with a big vulnerability. Now, the things that fight back, those are your countermeasures, the firewalls, the employee training, the company policies. And it's pretty simple. The stronger your countermeasures, the more you can knock that overall risk level down. All right, so now we know what risk is made of. The big question is, how do we measure it? Well, organizations generally use two different lenses to get a clear picture. Think of it like this. One is based on descriptions and gut feelings, and the other is all about the cold, hard numbers. So on one hand, you've got the qualitative approach. The best way to think about this is using descriptive words. It's pretty subjective, it's based on scenarios, and you end up with ratings like high, medium, or low. It's super fast and really great for making quick decisions. Then, on the other hand, you have the quantitative approach, which is purely numerical. This one is objective, it's totally data-driven, and the final output is a specific financial value, an actual dollar amount. And that is what you use to get your budget approved. And this is a perfect example of that qualitative method in action. What you're looking at is a risk assessment quadrant. Just imagine one axis is the value or the sensitivity of your asset, and the other axis is how vulnerable that asset is. So you can see right away when you have a high-value asset that also has a high vulnerability, boom, you land right in quadrant I. That's a high-risk situation. It's a really simple but super powerful visual way to immediately see where you need to focus your attention first. But what happens when high risk just isn't specific enough? I mean, what if you need to go convince your CFO to invest a bunch of money in a new security system? For that, you've got to speak their language, and that language is money. So we need to put a price tag on that risk. Let's dig into how we build that financial case. First up, we need to figure out something called the single loss expectation, or SLE for short. It's actually pretty straightforward. This is the total amount of money you expect to lose from one single incident. So if your main server goes down, how much money do you lose? You've got downtime, repair costs, lost business. Let's just say it all adds up to $10,000. That right there, that's your SLE. Okay, the next piece of the puzzle is the annual rate of occurrence, or ARO. And this is just what it sounds like. How many times do you expect that bad thing to happen in 1 year? So based on your past data or just looking at industry trends, you might predict that server is going to fail about twice a year. In that case, your ARO is 2. Simple as that. Now, here comes the really cool part. It's just simple math. You just multiply those two numbers together. Your annualized loss expectancy, or ALE, is simply the SLE times the ARO. And what that gives you is the total expected financial loss from that one specific risk over an entire year. So, going back to our example, that's a $10,000 loss happening twice a year, which gives us an ALE of $20,000. See the difference? Now you're not just walking into your boss's office saying, hey, server failure is a high risk. You're saying, hey, server failure is costing us an expected $20,000 a year. That is a number that gets people to take action. Okay, so you've identified and measured your risks, whether you did it with words or with numbers. The next logical step is to decide what in the world you're going to do about them. And broadly speaking, you've got four main choices. First, you can just avoid it. That's called avoidance. You just stop doing the risky thing altogether. Second, and this is the most common one, is mitigation. This is where you put in controls, like a new firewall or more employee training, to reduce the risk. Third, you can try transference. This is where you shift the financial weight to someone else, kind of like buying cyber insurance. And finally, there's acceptance. This is a conscious, eyes-wide-open decision to just live with the risk, usually because fixing it would cost more than the potential damage. And, for really complex systems, the analysis can get way, way deeper. The pros use advanced techniques like FMEA to figure out every single way a product could fail, or they use things like attack trees to literally map out every possible path an attacker might take to get into a system. These are some seriously powerful tools for high-stakes environments. At the end of the day, it really all boils down to this one simple idea. The security team, they're the ones building the walls and installing the alarms. But it's the audit process that comes in afterward and actually checks those walls for cracks and tests to make sure the alarms really go off. The audit provides the assurance, the proof that your protections are doing what you think they're doing. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. We've talked about how accepting risk can be a totally valid strategy, but it has to be a conscious choice. So the real question to ask yourself is this. In your own organization, or heck, even in your own life, which risks are you accepting without even knowing it? Which ones are you just living with, simply because you haven't taken the time to make them visible?